Welcome back. Welcome back to Living in Mexico. I'm Ana Maria Salazar. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. Once again, you can follow me on Twitter or X, it's now called X, at Mexico Daily, or where I send out a lot of information, especially in Spanish, is at AM Salazar. That's my personal account. It's been my personal account, believe it or not, literally since Twitter or X started mo- a long time ago. It's great to have you join us this weekend. You know, President Dr. Claudia Sheinbaum has only been in power. I don't know. I feels like it's been a year. It's been what somewhat, I would say, an exhausting week, mainly because we're all trying to understand what type of president she's going to be. And you get a pretty good sense um, with with Claudia Sheinbaum because she has continued with the tradition of having these morning press conferences, which are very helpful. I mean, I think what Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, in terms of creating this new process of communication, political communication, was very successful for him because basically he was speaking to mass media and to social networks or um, uh, Twitter, Instagram. I mean, you could see him everywhere, and people just in general would watch to hear what he has to say. And then, of course, the more traditional media, the media like this radio show would picks up kind of a summary of the most important aspects of these press conferences. As you know, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador press conferences would go on for hours, 3 hours. I think is he had very long press conferences. Claudia Sheinbaum, Dr. Claudia Sheinbaum, her press conferences has been much shorter, but they're also very helpful in trying to understand her position on many things. And one of the issues that, of course, was on the agenda, the political agenda and the government agenda this week was the constitutional reforms and now the discussion on how the implementation of the judicial reform is going to take place. Now this week they have started drafting and presenting and discussing how judges will be elected in Mexico. That's why I really appreciate today's guest joining us once again here on Living in Mexico. You know him well. He's been joining us for the last 15 years, I believe. Dr. Benito Nacif, he is one of the former commissioners of the Federal Electoral Institute. That was its name at the time. Now it's known as INE, National Electoral Institute. And of course, Benito, I'm sure you have been following very closely or trying to understand how the election of judges is going to take place, considering what the constitutional reform looks like. Welcome to the show. I mean, can you just describe to us what is supposed to happen next year? What does the constitutional reform say? Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ana Maria. Thank you for inviting me to your show. Well, we are going to have national elections.
Hmm.
The whole country is going to go to the polls on the 1st of June, 2025. Um, uh, and it's going to elect um, 9 members of the Supreme Court.
Hmm.
Um, 5 members of the um, Discipline Tribunal, Judicial
Hmm.
Discipline Tribunal, which is a new body that
The new body.
was created with the last judicial reform, and 7 members of the electoral the Superior Court of the Electoral Judiciary, and 15 members of the regional courts, electoral regional courts, and 148 magistrates of uh, circuit and appeal courts,
Hmm.
and 215 district judges. in total, it's around 400 offices, judicial offices that are going to be elected.
Four
Um,
hundred. 400. Is that correct? The
400,
number?
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And since there is a proportion or ratio between the number of offices and the number of candidates, um, we are going to have 1,290 candidates around that figure. We don't know the precise number because of the procedure to select the candidates.
Mm-hmm.
But um, uh, the the uh, the voter is going to face a very confusing ballot
Mm-hmm.
with lots of candidates for these collective bodies. For instance, uh, the voter is going to have to choose between 81 candidates and to elect 9 Supreme Justices. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Wow.
not going to be easy with very little
So
information.
So how does that work out? I mean, let's just imagine what this ballot looks like. There's going to be 9 positions, and then there's going to be 81 names, and people just are going to have to start kind of selecting the people that they want in those positions, and the person who has the most votes goes in the first position, the second person and becomes the president or presides the Supreme Court, the second one takes the second spot. Is that how it's going to work out?
Yes, well, with
Hmm.
INE, it's responsible for designing the ballot.
Hmm.
So we haven't seen the ballot, but
Hmm.
we can imagine that it's going to be a long list of names.
Hmm.
It's going to be divided up. Um, we're going to have like uh, 40 um, um, women
Hmm.
and 40 men.
Hmm.
And we have to choose um, either 5 women and 4 men uh, from that list. Uh, so that's how I imagine
Hmm.
the voter experience is going to be. Um, uh, we have no experience with that.
Yeah.
We uh, Voting is relatively easy in presidential, legislative
Hmm.
elections. This is going to be completely different.
Well,
And
yeah, I can't imagine them putting photographs or, I mean, logos. It's just basically going to be a name. 81 names. How come 80 some names? Why 80 some names?
uh, be, because of the rules
Hmm.
established in the Constitution,
Hmm.
um, each each um, branch of government
Hmm.
it's going to nominate
Hmm.
uh, 9 candidates for each office.
So, do you think with the way the rules are, that's just, I want to be kind of specific, particularly on the Supreme Court situation. So, is there any possibility that the president and her team decide on, I don't know, 10 names, and those 10 names happen to be the same ones presented by Congress? I mean, do you think they're going to be like coordinating among the 3 branches of power? I mean, how does the judiciary, for example, going to be part of this process? If
Yeah,
they're basically, I mean, how are they going to select judges if basically they're the ones who are being, I,
they are
tell me.
selecting candidates. In the
Mhm.
end, it's going to be the voter who is going to decide
Mhm.
um, who is who among those candidates are going to get elected.
Mhm.
Um, I said that each branch of government was going to nominate 9 candidates. In
Okay.
reality, it's 3 candidates
Okay.
for the Supreme Court. Um, 3 candidates, and that means since we have 3 branches of government, that's the reason why we have 9 candidates for each Supreme Justice to be elected. Uh, and if you multiply it by the total number of justices that are going to be elected, that's why we have
Hmm.
81 candidates.
It's
And the same is going to happen with the magistrates to the
hmm
disciplining tribunal and
hmm
the magistrates of the electoral tribunal as well. Um, so there is a lot of uncertainty about how things are going to shape up in terms of the definition of the ballot and how the election. We're learning day by day. Um,
hmm
um, until yesterday, we didn't know exactly what was going to be the role of the evaluating um, committees.
hmm
Um, um, the initial uh, I mean, the bill that was presented by President Sheinbaum um, gave these evaluating committees the decisive role in terms of defining the list of candidates who were going to participate in a ballot
hmm
to um, to finally select those who are going to be on the ballot.
But is there going to be an evaluating committee for each one of the branches? So I can
Exactly,
understand Congress is going to have their own evaluating um,
committee.
committee. The executive branch is going to have its own evaluating committee,
Yeah,
and the judicial branch. So, I mean, how do you even if you're going to be a candidate, do you try to get on the list? Do you go to the 3 branches? I mean, do you
yeah.
understand what I mean? Just the logistics of all of this. Do you try to go to the 3 of them and try to get yourself on the list of the 3 branches? I mean, or is it they were also talking about there being kind of a raffle if there was too many candidates, so they would just kind of raffle off and see who makes it to the list. I mean, I'm just I can't even figure out how is this gonna work out, and who I assume that very young attorneys or people who may be about to graduate are going to try to get into these lists. I mean, are they going to have enough time to evaluate all these people?
That is going to be one of the problems in the process because um, I was making the numbers and
Mhm.
each evaluating committee according to the rules
Mhm.
set up in the bill presented by Mrs. Sheinbaum, uh, um, it's going to have to produce a list of 4,000 candidates. I mean,
Wow.
these bodies are composed of 5 members. Uh,
Mhm.
and part of the selection process to those eligible to participate in the process,
Mhm.
um, uh, it's interviews. Okay. Um, the, I don't think they're going to have the time to interview for the four
Everybody.
thousand people. I mean, and this is, I mean, this number is the people that they have to select. Yeah, at least you have to interview two 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 aspiring two candidates for each one that they're going to
Mhm.
propose to
Mhm.
participate in the ballot. So they have 45 days to do that.
Mhm.
So I don't think that's enough time. So they
Well,
have
and this is
to improvise in some way.
but I mean, how do you improvise if the law says, it's supposed to be specific enough that
Yeah,
you so what is this ballot going to look like? The ballot, it potentially is going to have 4,000 names, is that right?
yeah. Well, not the ballot. Yeah,
Mhm.
the voter is going to face different ballots.
Mhm.
Uh, there's going to be one ballot only for the Supreme Court,
Mhm.
and that ballot is going to have a list of 81 candidates,
Mhm.
more or less. Well, it could be less than 81 if the same branch of government, if more than one branch of government proposes the same candidate, which according to
Mhm.
the rules can happen. Um,
Mhm.
and then you're going to have the ballot for the magistrates of the disciplining tribunal
Mhm.
with 45 names. And then you're going to have the ballot for the magistrates of the electoral tribunal with
Mhm.
63 candidates.
Mhm.
And then you're going to have, depending on which um, electoral circumscription, if you say that,
Mhm. Right.
um, uh, you're going to have a ballot with 45 candidates for your regional
Mhm.
electoral tribunal or court.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's the way it's going to happen. And depending on which circuit you live,
Mhm.
uh, you're going to have a, a different ballot for mag- um, circuit magistrates of circuit courts
Mhm.
and well, and uh, district judges as well. So, I mean, it's it, um, it's going to be different depending on where you live in Mexico, basically.
Joining it's joining us today is Benito Nacif. He's a former commissioner on the Federal Electoral Institute, now known as the National Electoral Institute. But Benito, I'm just listening to you, and I don't know if you've seen my faces and kind of the grimaces. It's impossible. I mean, how long is it going to take for the very few people, because I'm sure it's going to not going to be a lot of people who go out to vote, but for, the very few people that go out and vote, how long is it going to take to vote, to go through all these ballots?
Well, we really don't know because we uh, do not have uh, the ballots
Mhm.
yet. Um, as, as far as I know, the National Electoral Institute is going to conduct some experiments to
Mhm.
measure, uh, but we know now that it's going to take longer than um, a general election in which you vote for um,
President.
president,
Mhm.
Senate candidates, Chamber
Mhm.
of Deputies candidates, governors. Uh, um, when you have the whole enchilada of uh, a general election,
Mhm.
uh, it's going to be several times longer than that.
But you know what the crazy thing is, that they want eventually for these elections to take place at the same time that the other elections are taking place. I think that's kind of I mean,
That's going to be
I
a
can
nightmare for the elect
yeah.
for everyone.
Yeah. I mean, I can understand why they want to do it because of the cost, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't when you were at the national at the Federal Electoral Institute, how long did it take each person to vote for general elections? About 5 minutes, right? 4 or 5 minutes.
Well, more than that, I would say 10 minutes.
Hmm. So, and that
From
was
the moment you collect
right.
your ballot to the moment you collect your voter ID,
Hmm.
I would say it's more than
Is it
10 minutes.
yeah, well, then just think. I mean, we're talking about someone who it could take an hour maybe for each
Yeah.
person to try to go to vote. I mean, is this feasible? Is it possible? I mean, are we just running the risk that regardless of what the law says, that it's just impossible for this to happen. I think it's like asking, why don't we go find the unicorns in the moon? Let's just kind of bring two home. I mean, it's impossible. You know what I mean? I
Yeah.
can they do it?
Well, if I mean, basically, if you vote randomly
Mhm.
without thinking, without reading the names that are on the ballot,
Mhm.
uh, um, well, that could simplify things. But
Yeah.
basically, yeah, we are not going to have much information about who is in the ballot. Um, if you want to um, uh, learn something about who they are,
Mhm.
um, INE is going to set up a web page, and the ads that you're going to see on TV are going to
Mhm.
direct you to these web pages
Mhm.
where you can look at the CVs and probably the messages that
Mhm.
they post on their web pages of all the candidates.
Mhm.
That's the only way you will learn something about them. Yeah,
Mhm.
and I mean the number of candidates is it's very large,
Mhm.
and very few people are going to have the time uh, to uh, get some information
Mhm.
that they would consider relevant to decide um, who are they going to vote for. So, I mean that part it's going to be, um, I would say, impossible to solve. We're going to have, I mean, the turnout rate is going to be extremely low. We know that by experience in Bolivia.
Mhm.
Very few people vote for supreme justices, which are the only offices elected in Bolivia. Yeah.
Mhm.
Mexico is going to be the only country in the world
Right.
where you elect uh, the uh, I mean the whole federal judiciary is going to be on the ballot.
One last question, and I really appreciate you joining us today, Benito Nacif. He's a former commissioner at the National Electoral Institute, now known, well, it was the Federal Electoral Institute, now known as the National Electoral Institute. I mean, is there, at what point does the INE or the head of the INE come out and say, we can't do this? I mean, it's physically impossible. We don't have the resources because they're going to have resources. I imagine they're going to have to assign new resources for new elections and a new process. Um, at what point can the National Electoral Institute just raise its hand and say, we have to postpone this because we just can't do it? We didn't get the names, we can't get the ballots. I mean, I can just imagine 20, 34 things going really, really wrong in between now and June because they basically are talking about doing this in about 8 months. It's supposed to be on June 2nd, correct?
Yes, it's either June 2nd or June the 1st.
Oh, June
Um,
1st.
yeah, I think it's June the 1st. Um, oh, I don't know. Uh, Part of the problem that we are having right now with the organization of that election
Mhm.
is that um, judge district judges um, have granted suspensions
Mhm.
um, as part of the amparo suits against this constitutional reform.
Mhm.
And those suspensions instruct INE not to go ahead with the organization of the election.
Mhm. Mhm.
We are talking about uh, um, dozens of suspensions
Mhm.
issued by uh, district district judges, and in one case, one court of appeal, which is an an INE doesn't know what to do.
Mhm.
Basically, they didn't um, appeal
Mhm.
um, within the usual amparo suit procedure.
Mhm.
So they decided to go to the electoral tribunal and basically ask electoral magistrates, please uh, tell me what to do.
Right.
So right now we're in the middle of a constitutional crisis because the electoral tribunal, I don't think, has the authority to
Mhm.
intervene in the procedure of an amparo suit. And
Mhm.
INE missed the opportunity
To
to
try to.
yeah, to appeal. So I don't know what's going to happen.
Oh gosh, I always hate to end an interview when someone says, "I don't know what's going to happen," because this administration, it's only been in power for what, 2 weeks now,
Yeah,
and it is, and we already have a very serious constitutional crisis, regardless of whether you support the uh, the the reforms or not. It was expected that there was going to be a constitutional crisis. And of course, because of the drafting, because they drafted it in such haste, there's also even problems with, I believe, with some of the way it was drafted, just kind of basic mistakes when you're drafting such complicated legislation. And then most of these reforms, and I know you've watched reforms, important reforms taking place in different parts of the world. The ones that I saw even participate in terms of, assistant and providing, technical assistance, these types of reforms, once, the drafting in itself can take sometimes years or at least months just to draft it, and then they usually provide a certain amount of time, and it can be years for the transition. I mean, the justice reform in Mexico to the new criminal justice system, the accusatory, the known as accusatory system, the judicial branch had what, 8 years to do this transition, and it still kind of was messy, and it didn't work all. I mean, there's still a lot of problems with it. You know what I mean? Now they
yeah,
want to do all of this in. Yeah, it looks like six. It's going to end up being a couple of weeks.
yeah.
And I just don't see how this is going to. I don't see how this is going to end well. But at least it's interesting to talk to you because the whether you believe in the reform or not, and there's a very interesting debate as to whether judges should be elected or not, that we can talk about that at another time. What are the advantages or disadvantages? But the bottom line, the reform's been approved, and there will be some type of process to elect judges. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens, Benito. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you to you.
Thank you. That was Benito Nacif. He's been joining us throughout the years. He was an academic, and then he was at the Federal Electoral Institute, and now he's a professor. He went back to academia, and I always appreciate you talking to you. Let's go to a commercial break. I'm Ana Maria Salazar, and you're listening and watching Living in Mexico. Don't go away. I'll be right back.